This is an interview with a guy named RJ Eskow that Matt Taibbi did. And I'm just going to start it off with kind of the tone that they set using this Voltaire quote. And this is we're gonna go through a lot of this because this is very good stuff. Let's dive into it.
Yeah. One of the things you've obviously been covering is I forget what you and Michael Schellenberger and a couple other folks call it, but the censorship industrial complex, right? Isn't it? Isn't that it? And it's very interesting to me because I always go back to not to get all high flown about it, but I do always go back to Voltaire. And I think it was Voltaire who said, I despise what you say, but I will defend to the death your right to say it. This used to be, as you've talked about a lot in your writing and elsewhere, a mainstream opinion, especially among American liberals or...
It did used to be a mainstream opinion. And an interesting side note here, I don't know if you remember a few years ago, Thomas Massey got in trouble for posting the quote, "To learn who controls you, learn who you can't criticize." And people came out after that and said that was a Nazi racist quote, which I had always heard it was attributed to Voltaire. But, once you start getting close to the... once you get over the target, you're a racist. You know how that goes. So the next little bit they talk about here is how, and this is so good, tribalism has kind of ruined the discourse in the country.
For example, to defend the right of somebody to, I guess two things, and then I'll throw it back to you, but one, to defend the right of people to express ideas they find politically disagreeable or even abhorrent, which used to be the whole point, among Democrats, and I'm sure among Republicans too, but Democrats is where the shift is. So there's that, and the sort of de-Voltairizing of a Democratic Party culture. And then the other piece of it is that, as Thomas Frank and others have written, the Democratic Party has become a party of professional, elite, educated people. And so I think COVID was a turning point because there were ideas that challenged the scientific consensus. And while I understand the desire to protect lives and that maybe the scientific consensus is a way to do that, when you cross the line into censoring scientists, you talk about Dr. J. Bhattacharya, who was a Stanford, I believe, medical scientist or something, who was censored. The culture of professional insiderism, as well as the culture of Team Blue, seems to me to be a factor. But I don't know. That's my take on it. What do you think?
So I think I would have agreed wholeheartedly with that. And part of it I still do. I think one of the things I testified about last week in a kind of a vain effort to try to reach out to Democrats was to point out the class nature of this whole thing, that this is basically exclusively affluent professional class America, insisting upon a closed door credential system whereby, sort of groups of institutions, the military, intelligence related groups, the Global Engagement Center under state, they work with academic institutions, the media.
So this is interesting because basically what he's explaining here is what we talk about on this show all the time, how the legacy media used to be gatekeepers. They used to be able to gatekeep elections. And Trump kind of overturned that in 2016. And that right there is why all of this started. And these guys, of course, go into a little bit more detail on this. But let Matt continue while I finish creating this cigarette that I'm working on right here.
but it's all sort of upper class Ivy League types. You cannot be involved in the censorship effort or anti-disinformation and be like a working class ordinary person. Like that's just not possible. So ultimately,
that is so key right there, because this is the gatekeep that I was just talking about. In the past, the CNNs and the MSNBCs and the Fox Newses of the world have been the kingmakers during election season because they control the discourse. And if everyone's talking about how Bernie Sanders is a secret Russian or Trump is secretly working with Putin, that is a good way to control the election. And you can see them attempting to do it now. I hope it doesn't work, but like I have relatives who are super concerned about abortion suddenly. They only get concerned about abortion every 4 years when the Democrats are trying to scare them about it. But this new landscape, this new internet landscape is a threat to these people who have always been able to gatekeep elections. Let me let Matt continue here.
You're talking about a tiny group of people who are designing the algorithms that are going to decide who gets to be heard and who doesn't get to be heard. Now, I think that's part of the picture, but in the last year or so of having to research this story a lot, we continually find that the roots of this go back to the war on terror. A lot of these groups that are doing anti-disinformation work have their genesis in the post 9/11 growth of the security state. A lot of the institutions that do this work exclusively began as counter-disinformation groups that targeted Al-Qaeda and ISIS.
And that right there is why Dick Cheney and John Bolton are behind Kamala Harris, the neocons.
And they eventually sort of made this switch that one former Joint Terrorism Task Force official described to me as CT to CP, which is counterterrorism to counterpopulism. And you see this, we built this kind of gigantic extra legal machinery to go after propaganda by ISIS and al-Nusra and all these other groups. And then after a series of incidents, beginning with Tea Party, Occupy, the Arab Spring, then it's Brexit, Trump, Jeremy Corbyn, the Sanders movement, all those things convince people in the national security and foreign policy establishment that we have to start using these tools domestically. And
this was liberal America's response to that.
America, you and me, ain't that America?
So let's jump up to another piece of this conversation. The thing that's funny to me about all this too is when you really break this down, they're fighting for control over something that isn't real, right? Like the internet isn't real. Unplug it and go outside. But it clearly shapes the way people think about everything. It's the new media, and it's so obvious to people like me what's going on. These people, the Andrea Mitchells and the David Muirs and the Brian Williams of the world used to be the kingmakers. They're basically fucking actors that read a script on TV. And now you have real reporters like Matt Taibbi with the access to the internet, and Glenn Greenwald and Lee Fong and Max Blumenthal. And these guys are actually doing real news. And they're, 6 months ahead of, the David Muirs and the actors who read scripts on TV. So they kind of go into what he just said, the whole thing about populism. I'm just going to keep playing this because this whole thing, we're not going to watch the whole thing, but the whole thing is really good.
That is when you see the switch. And what is so scary about this is they don't particularly distinguish between, let's say, an outraged political electoral movement in the United States or in Britain and a terrorist group overseas. Like the machinery is the same in both cases. The Democratic Party has just become kind of like the establishment party at this point. You might have still had some bipartisan elements of it if Donald Trump had not swept in 2016.
Oh, we do have some bipartisan elements, Matt. I don't know if you saw Dick Cheney and John Bolton and a bunch of other hacks have lined up behind Kamala Harris. So that point that he's making there, the Democratic Party is the establishment now. Yeah, they're the status quo. Arguing with someone about the election, or someone who's close to me that wants me to vote for Kamala Harris, which will never happen. And I kind of broke it down to her the other night. I'm just like, look, at the very basic core, this election is a choice between continuing the status quo, which is going on now, or changing it. And Trump is the change, and Kamala Harris is the continuation. No matter how many times they go out and say, turn the page or whatever bullshit hypnosis line they're using this week, it's pretty obvious what the choice is between the status quo or something different. And I'm not arguing that Trump is going to radically change anything. That is yet to be seen. He definitely talks a good game, but he was president once for 4 years. So we'll see. But, every election is a choice between the lesser of two evils, and right now Trump is definitely the lesser of two evils.
And obliterated what was left of the Bush neoconservatives. Now, basically, you see this sort of polarity where it's one group of politicians, sort of neoliberal.
I disagree that he obliterated what was left of the Bush neoconservatives, because they're all lining up behind Kamala, Matt. I'm sure you've seen that.
Neoconservative politicians manning all of these groups and seeing all these belligerents around them as linked in a way. Everything from Viktor Orban to Modi to Trump to anti-vaxxers, they're all threats. They're all categorized in the same way. And
they're all threats to the status quo.
But ain't that America? You and me. Ain't that America?
And I think that's kind of important to understand. Like, yes, the cultural thing has happened. There have been lots of changes about how we think about speech. But more importantly, it's coincided with this collapse in trust in institutions in America, in the functioning of the sort of establishment two-party system. We've seen all these uprisings, electoral and otherwise, all over the world, and this is part of the machinery that they've wheeled out in response. And I think they're not wrong on some level, right? Like, a lot of these uprisings and political movements would not have been possible without Twitter and other platforms like it, because free media works.
Well, it's so interesting.
So this guy makes the best point right now, and I'm not even going to step on it. Just listen to what he says.
And this is where my political ideology comes in, but I think it's right because it's mine. You wouldn't have the Tinder for this, social media wildfire if you had a system that was working for the majority of people. There were some political scientists who did a study, I think it was after Trump. I think it was 2018, 2019.
You wouldn't have this problem if the system was working. And that's what Taibbi called, what the security state or the censorship industrial complex sees all these groups as belligerents. Absolutely. The Bernie Sanders campaign was a group of belligerents who we want healthcare. Give us healthcare. Nothing has changed, of course. They just, censored and stopped everybody and let Trump win. They basically the genesis of this project led to Trump's election, because they tried to censor all the dissidents during the Bernie campaign, and then Trump just ended up beating Hillary Clinton. So in 2020, They went to extreme measures.
Where they surveyed people in Western Europe.
In 2020, they went to extreme
Ain't that America? You and me. Ain't that America?
European countries and North American countries. So, quote unquote, developed world, as it used to be called. And they found that, among other things, that more than a third of the people they surveyed were more than willing, I'm going to seriously paraphrase from the political science language, but this was the gist of it. For example, were more than willing to knowingly pass on misinformation if it was emotionally satisfying or pissed off the people they thought were running the world, for one thing. But they used a striking phrase. They said that this subset of the population, mostly working class, mostly middle, lower income rather, lower at 50%, below the 50% mark. The phrase they used, they were Dutch or something, was the sentiment they expressed was they wanted to burn down the political cosmos, the democratic cosmos. They want to burn it down. And that
disrupt the status quo. That's the thing that, the brunch liberals who think Kamala Harris is a good idea don't understand about the political landscape of the last 20 years. And honestly, this next election to me is going to be a proving ground on the Nielsen ratings that I just showed a couple weeks ago, because the Nielsen ratings show that streaming is overtaking broadcast and cable. And once you get to streaming, you've got multiple voices in the mix. And yeah, I mean, my relatives who are brunch liberals watch the fucking, YouTube feed for ABC News or whatever bullshit corporate crap they pipe into YouTube. But it's when you look at the podcast circuit that Trump's doing, I think this election is going to be telling, because if Trump wins by a landslide, it means the media landscape has changed completely and the corporate media is pretty much dead, which I think that they're going to fight tooth and nail to prevent, and you can see it happening. But that's what I'm interested to see the results of this election. I don't think that Trump winning will change anything major any more than I think Kamala Harris winning will change anything major. But I'm interested to see the results of this election for that reason. So these guys here, they get into this thing right here, they get into this thing about how populism is demonized. And he says something I never thought about, which is populism is popular. Populism is popular. Like, it's related to things that are popular among people.
To me, what was missing from their analysis is, to me, that's a rational response to a system that's screwed you for decades, right? So from a political point of view, there are two ways to respond to that. You can meet their needs and hear them out, or you can try to suppress those voices. And
yes. This right here, this is the genesis, like what he just said right there. You can meet people's needs or you can try to suppress them. That is the genesis of this show, really. This is the genesis of me being involved with the Bernie campaign. It's the genesis of all that, because the first election cycle I volunteered for Bernie was the 2015-2016 cycle. And I was banned from Twitter multiple times for ridiculous things. And it became clear to me now that then, because what was happening then, the dynamic that was happening then, let's go back. Let's go back to the Bernie days. So back then, Bernie was winning primaries, and the corporate media, people like Chris Matthews and what's that other broad's name that was upset about Nevada? I don't remember her name now, but anyway, they were so upset. And it was visible how upset they were that their grip was slipping away. Because all year they were like, Biden and Kamala, Biden and Kamala, Biden and Kamala. That's who you're going to vote for. And then everyone voted for Bernie Sanders. And Chris Matthews at that point likened the Bernie campaign to like the Nazis. They ran the typical corporate CUNT playbook when that happened. And what this guy just said just basically sums all that up. You have two choices when you have these kind of voices of dissent. You can either listen to them or suppress them. And guess which route the Democrats went? And guess which route their dumbass partisan hack followed? You're going to see that a lot. Sorry. Actually, not sorry. It's fucking hilarious.
It seems to me, or you can exploit their frustration. My take, Trump exploited the frustration, and the Democrats are trying to suppress the voices, or maybe throw a little bit of what people need. But, you know, telling people that the economy is good when they don't think it's good is...
Exactly.
You know, and so what goes along with it is all of a sudden populism became a dirty word after 2016. You know, the populist movements of the 19th century were progressive, they were enlightened, they paved the way for all sorts of things.
So again, this is what frustrates me so much about the Democratic Party. They pretend to be the progressives while they continually stomp real progressives. Like the Republicans sit and call them progressive. The Democratic Party is not progressive. And again, this guy just really making a great case here.
We take for granted now, retirement income, minimum wage, or those types of things. But populism became a dirty word, which means democracy is a dirty word because populism is what's popular, right? So
democracy just got twisted into meaning the rule of law, or like basically the rule of the elites that have the fucking reins right now. I think in the debate I showed between Pelosi and the Mumford and Sons guy, Pelosi literally says in that, and I'll have to go back and watch this clip or pull it up, but she says democracy is the rule of law. No, democracy is the rule of the majority. It's not the rule of law. Some cunt can make a law.
To me, and I think this was a primrose path people were led down, but I think that's where they're left. And I think that, you know, last comment is, you know, I think outlets like MSNBC and CNN have contributed to this by, for example, I had an argument on this very subject with a very bright and good guy, constitutional law professor, and I asked him what he thought of the weaponization committee hearing and the way you and Schellenberger have been, I think it was Schellenberger was with you, have been treated by the Democrats on that committee. He knew nothing about it. This is someone who specializes in free speech issues. So that plus the, you know, echo chamber effect, I think we're in trouble.
So I want to pause there for a second because I've made this point before, and I if there are any brunch libs watching out there, I don't hate you. I think that brunch liberals are well-meaning. I mean, I have several in my family. I don't think that they're bad people. I think they're misinformed people because that's what the corporate news does these days. They do this.
But ain't that America? You and me. Ain't that America?
Taibbi says, basically sums up the anger that people have and why I like Trump, honestly, because he pisses off people at MSNBC and CNN.
I totally agree. I think your analysis is correct. You know, what they're doing, and this is it's just a mechanization. It's designing an algorithm to multiply at scale the mistake that was made in 2016. So when you went out in the campaign trail and you talked to people at Trump crowds and asked them why are you voting for Donald Trump, you would get all kinds of answers, but the number one answer was like, I know he's full of it. I'm voting for him because I want to piss off, you know, all these clowns I see on television who I know are freaked out by him. And you know, that sentiment has continued. You referenced telling people that their feelings about the economy are wrong. You know, Paul Krugman, the Nobel Prize winning columnist, you know, he recently did a column where he's commenting on a survey that the Guardian US did about feelings about the economy. How do you feel about the economy? And huge numbers of Americans said they didn't feel so hot about it. And he describes this as a falsehood, as, you know, as a kind of misinformation, that your own perceptions of your own anxiety are incorrect. That is not reality. And that's what they're trying to do with this anti-disinformation program. They begin with things that sound like they make sense. Oh, we have to stop people from saying that if you get the vaccine, you're going to get a microchip implanted or whatever it is, right? And that's very rational. Then you get under the hood of what these programs really are, and you find that they're defining misinformation, disinformation, or malinformation, which is a very Orwellian concept, which means true but sort of inconvenient. They define it as anything that kind of undermines confidence in government policies. So the classic example with COVID was any news that, you know, promoted hesitancy. So that could be something as simple as a person who's very pro-vaccine doing a Facebook post saying, yeah, an uncle of mine got the shot and died of myocarditis.
That's misinformation, FYI.
But ain't that America? For you and me, ain't that America?